Hey, fellow patriots, I'm Bree.
And I'm Blaze. Some call me Pa. It has been said that we have 4 boxes to keep ourselves free. These are the soap box, the ballot box, the jury box, and the ammo box.
And we are the 4th box. We are here to arm you with enough information, resources, and skills to take back your freedom, increase your self-sufficiency, and inspire you to join in the fight against tyranny.
Thomas Jefferson said, "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty." Thank you for joining us and for joining in this fight.
Welcome back to the 4th box. All right, everybody, what is going on? We are back with Blaze and Bree at the 4th Box podcast. We have Pops tuning in from Florida, a little bit of a beach vacay going on this week. So we're going to do our best to keep this short and sweet. We'll see how that goes. I can be long-winded at times, but we do want you to get back to your vacay, Pops. So welcome back to the 4th Box, Pops. Welcome back, everybody. I think we've got a good episode ahead.
Yeah, great to be with you again, 4th Box listeners. As always, we here at the 4th Box podcast would like to mention that we come to you each and every week on Thursday, 6 p.m. from the virtual Buckman Tavern, the place of patriots gather, that great spot up on Lexington Green, which was the meeting place of those patriots so many years ago, 250 years ago, 251 now since the actual shot heard around the world, right there in front of the Buckman Tavern on Lexington Green. And at the 4th Box, for any of the listeners, those are the 4 boxes that we have to keep ourselves free, as noted by both Stephen Decatur Miller and later on Frederick Douglass, which are the soap box, ballot box, jury box, and ammo box. And we here at the 4th Box intend to try to arm you with information to make your pursuit of personal liberty more successful by giving you some skills for personal survival, personal understanding of the way the rule of law was intended to be, how government was supposed to act in accordance with the will of the people. So we try to arm you with that. That's the gist of the 4th Box podcast. Tonight I am raising a land shark, which is, here's my cozy, which is, it says it's a bad day to be a beer down here on the central Gulf Coast of Florida, enjoying the beautiful sun. But tonight I am toasting Representative Keith Self from out of Texas. He has introduced a resolution to repeal the 17th Amendment. And I think they ought to do the 16th as well. But for those that might have forgot, the 17th Amendment was when they took the selection of senators from the state legislators and they made it a general vote, which really took a great amount of power away from the states. And now senators are elected in a general election, not any longer selected by the state legislators, which really gave a lot of power, as was intended by the founders, to be left to the states. So Keith Self out of Texas has introduced a resolution. Not sure how well that'll be received, and almost guaranteed to be not received at all well in the Senate if it does make it out of the House. But I am toasting him tonight and congratulating him on his effort. And while they're at it, they might as well repeal the 16th, which, as you all well know, that's the income tax unconstitutional law as well.
Yeah. Cheers.
And I'm enjoying a land shark down here in the sunny shores of Florida. My quote tonight from George Orwell: "In our age, there is no such thing as keeping out of politics. All issues are political issues, and politics itself is a mass of lies, evasions, folly, hatred, and schizophrenia." That was from George Orwell. And you know, I can honestly say I cannot find anything to argue with about that quote. We know we've been lied to. We know government is no longer responsive to the people. 70% of the people in his country want nothing to do with the war with Iran. And here we go, heating up again over there as we speak. 70%. The majority of people in this country want there to be fair and free elections, but we cannot get it through the Congress. So there are other forces than us, we the people, who are the influences on our elected officials. And this is way out of bounds. So George Orwell's quote is very much point on in my estimation. Moment in history. It's getting interesting. We're 1 week away from the celebration of the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which really leaped us into our concerted effort, a congealing of all of these forces within the colonial states here now to be pushing forward to get for us, our founders, that independence that they so desperately sought. So our moment in history, Thomas Hickey, named Thomas Hickey, Continental Army private and bodyguard to General George Washington, is hanged for mutiny and sedition. He turncoated, and he was very close to General Washington, and he was hanged subsequently this week, 250 years ago. As I said, all things now are stepping up as the document becomes signed. The urgency and the intensity of achieving this goal just ratcheted up another step. So we're looking forward to next week and the celebration of the founding and the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Huge, lots of celebrations going on. I hope everybody takes a little time to look at the history that has gone into the events leading up to that signing. These folks were risking their lives, their fortune, and their honor to do this. If they would have lost this, these people would have been hung themselves. So they were that committed, risked all their family fortunes, everything to pursue what we now are watching slip through our fingers because largely the country is asleep. So that was our moment in history 250 years ago, and looking forward to the next week ahead where we celebrate the anniversary of the signing.
Yeah, it feels crazy that we're already at this point. I mean, we're already more than halfway through the year. You've been doing this for over 6 months, giving us, moments in history leading up to this huge event. And your quote was so awesome tonight. And I think it's really going to tie into what I wanted to talk about, which I've sort of been having this in mind since our conversation last week with Sheriff Richard Mack. He wrote this new book, The Democrat Murder of America. And certainly there are things that we are on board with. I mean, I'm not going to say that that's not true. I just think that we are very much of the belief that the country's being murdered by both parties in equal parts, but through different ways. And I wanted to talk about that tonight because I think it's really important that we recognize that there is a threat, surely, from the Democrat Party, but there's a threat from the other side too. And it wouldn't really be doing our listeners a good service to not speak about both of those things. So basically, the concept tonight that I have in mind here is talking about this idea of communism, which Sheriff Mack kind of alluded to last week, discussing his book in detail. This is the problem with the Democrat Party, is that they're walking us into communism, and they're taking these baby steps, but it's sort of been getting put on the fast track in the last few years. So communism versus corporatocracy, which is the idea of corporations being involved. And I say this way because this is kind of how I view the right. Yeah, I do think that the left is pushing us more towards communism, but I also think that the right is at fault. Well, there's a lot of ways we could frame that, but in my estimation, the thing that has been the most damning is that it's been moving away from this idea of us being a republic and into this idea of us being a corporatocracy. And I do think, don't get me wrong, I do think there are people on both sides that are guilty of both. I think there are leftists and people on the right that are kind of more geared towards communism. And I think same thing. I think there are Democrats and Republicans that are kind of going towards this idea of corporatocracy. And in a lot of ways, I think they have some overlap. So some are guilty of both of those things. But looking at them from a distance and looking at what both parties seem to trend towards, this is kind of what it signals to me. The left is communists, the right is corporatists. So we know that the two-party system is broken. We talk about it on here all the time. We've talked about it with guests. We talk about how, the ballot box doesn't work anymore. We talk about these things. But why? I think it's because modern American politics isn't a choice between right and left anymore. It's a choice between two different flavors of control. And that, in this case, if we're going to break it down this way, is communism and corporatocracy, which are both forms of control. Let's not fool ourselves. So I'm going to kind of explain my reasoning for both. Before I do that, I'll just say the reason that I'm framing it this way is because basically of what Sheriff Mack said last week. The modern left, if we look at it, is comparable to communism, or is kind of leading us into communism, because communism is basically total reliance on centralized authority. It's also a redistribution of wealth, i.e. welfare. Communism can also look like classlessness. Like, that's kind of one of the staples for a communist society. We remove this idea of class structure. We make everything equal. Which is that not what the left is always fighting for? Equality at all costs, inclusivity, forget meritocracy. It's out the window, DEI, everything, right? So these are ideas that are staples in the Democrat system right now. And they're very much in line with what a communist ideology looks like. Now, the flip side of that, what I think that the modern right looks like is total deference to corporations, profit over people, and it's where government starts to look like less of a service to the constituents and more of a business tool. So we start seeing people in power having a lot of sway over people in government. I think that's what we're seeing right now with this administration, and that's where we have the Republicans in office, and that's why I'm drawing those comparisons. What are your thoughts before we start breaking this down?
Yeah, I think those are great observations. I think in both cases, as you alluded to, as we've mentioned many times in our previous podcast, that there is a group that kind of influences the American political structure. So we have this pretentious notion of the right and the left, but they're both ultimately working for the same group, which is really making an effort, in our estimation, to tear this country down so that there is a clear path to a one world domination, one world government, where a very few we no longer call them elites, thanks to our guest a couple of weeks ago, but the weasels in the Epstein class who have worked their way into this small circle that ultimately seek to run the world. And I think both of the things that you mentioned are tools that are being employed. So they keep us so distracted by the left-right paradigm that we're really not recognizing the enemy behind the left-right thing. So anyway, just to cut that short, again, I think both the left and the right are working for the ultimate goal of those that are in this very small circle of people that want to just dominate the world for the sake of world government. And they both are. Yeah, I had to move that camera around a little bit. They both are ultimately working toward the same end. I think the distraction is the illusion that there's a real difference. I too would disagree with Sheriff Mack. Trump is far from falling into favor when significant things that he campaigned against are now taking place, and quite honestly, he seems very much compliant with whoever is applying the pressure, the Israeli lobby or the other corporate interests, military industrial complex, etc. So we have nothing different. We can pretend we do, and I think that's largely what people committed to political parties do. If you don't stand for principle, you just go along with what the party tells you to believe. And it's our guy in there, it's our party in there, even though none of the things have changed. And we have control of the Senate, the House, the presidency, and the courts.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And that's kind of why I wanted to talk about this, because even though they're two completely different concepts, and you can look at it in two different ways where they overlap in some sense and sort of both ultimately lead to the same thing, or you can look at it from the perspective of their actual polar opposites. Communism is the idea of everybody owning everything, which if everybody owns everything, then nobody owns anything, but that's a separate point. And corporatism is the idea that the corporations own everything. So it's kind of two different ways of looking at it, but it's two different extremes. And I agree with you that both of the extremes are being pushed by one group. And I think that is because of that reason, because of that tribal mindset that people still have. People are so locked into the right and so locked into the left. And I wanted to talk about this tonight because even though I think a lot of our listeners are not, I do still think that people will choose one over the other, because the people on the right will say, we're fighting communism. But the people on the left can say, well, we're fighting corporatocracy. And because they're framed as such extremes, it gives that party fuel. It gives you more of a reason to think the other side is the problem, even if both of those ideas at their extreme end are being pushed by one group in the middle, which we can see.
That was a great way of explaining it. And maybe I wasn't getting to the point, or maybe some of those things that we discussed leading up to that helped you. But I think that really helped clarify what I think we're both trying to say is that, yeah, there are two very extreme differences if you allow yourself to get caught up in what to me is simply a distraction to keep us from being focused on the real problem.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to break both of them down a little further just so we can see why they're painted the way that they are. At least in this conversation, you can paint them a million different ways, but let's look at the Democrats as the communist side. If we're going to choose one or the other, if we're going to say, hey, I'm choosing, the lesser of two evils, which many of us do and have done, then let's say we're choosing communism here. What does that look like right now? Right now, over 250 Democratic Socialists of America members, so this is a group that basically endorsed different candidates, DSA. Members of this group, over 250 of them currently hold office across the U.S., mostly, oddly enough, at local and state levels. You might think it would be the reverse, but it's not, which is interesting because this is telling me that this idea is actually being kind of pushed from bottom up rather than top down, which is more concerning because you can see how people close to the bottom can spread this message a little bit more easily. Another interesting fact about this is about 90% of those people have been elected since 2019. So this is kind of a recent trend, which is a little bit interesting to think about. This is people like Zohran Mamdani, AOC. And like I said, a lot of these people are at the local and state level. So most of the names on this list I've never heard of because, they're very, very small local players. But it's still important because these ideas are being spread in the same way that Sheriff Mack was talking about last week that I think we did agree with, where there is danger in this type of thinking. There's danger in thinking that socialism is the right choice, is the better choice than a democratic republic, than the republic that we are supposed to be, that constitutionally we are. And I know that I'm talking about communism while referencing the Democratic Socialists of America. But all that said, if we compare socialism to communism, the jump is actually quite close. And I'm certainly not the first person to make this suggestion. We know that. We can look at history and see how socialist ideologies will eventually form into full-on communism. So I think it's an interesting thing to just kind of consider the amount of people that are in office who claim themselves outright to be socialists. And then if we really want to break that down in more detail, the thing that's really interesting about looking back at communist societies like the Soviet Union, etc., most of those people at that time said that they never reached full communism. They were still in a state of socialism. So that's even more concerning because it shows how much of a slippery slope that is from one into the other. So we'll jump onto the other side, but really, just to break this all down, what would this look like at its most extreme if this really came to power, fully heightened, very clear? It'd be government expansion into every aspect of life. Okay, well, kind of feels like we're seeing that in a lot of ways. It would be very heavy redistribution. So, welfare state growing and growing. Okay, well, kind of feels like we're seeing that too. And it would be the bureaucracy replacing local control, which I think we already know that's true. I mean, everyone looks to federal power instead of local power. So, obviously, the key danger of all of this is just the loss of individual autonomy to centralized power. If, we were really living in a fully communist state. Are we yet? No. But when we look at what it would look like, yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say we're getting there.
Yeah, a couple of quick points. First, on the point you made about many of the folks that are already elected to office, sitting in elected office seats that are announced themselves as democratic socialists, being at the local level. This is terribly concerning because, as we've talked many times, all politics is local, and that is where, if you want to make a sea change, it starts at the local level. It starts in the community. And if they are taking control in those areas, their path to being successful is going to be that much quicker. It's going to be because they are grassroots, their ground level. They are influencing local and county and state level politics, which then ultimately is going to bleed over to national politics. Secondarily, a point I wanted to make, and you might recall Sheriff Mack talking about Nikita Khrushchev last week, big, fat, angry, pounding his shoe on the podium at the United Nations, telling the United States that we will wipe you out by putting socialism in a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time, and a little bit at a time, precisely to your point. And ultimately, you wake up one day and you have full blown communism because it's been watered down and brought in these little bite sized chunks, and everybody's accepting it. And pretty soon, the state is in control of everything, which really is symptomatic of socialism, state controlled transportation, communication, manufacturing, all of those things. And we are largely there, as you pointed out. And again, not to reiterate the point, but this all works toward the end, toward the goal of those behind the scenes. So if the Democrat side of the equation now in favor of socialism, i.e., communism, has a little bit of the momentum, and the Republican side is corporate cronyism and all of those things, it doesn't matter to those behind the scenes what is successful in knocking this country out of its premier perch as a global leader, monetarily, economically, militarily, and educationally. As long as we get knocked out of the way, we are helping achieve their end goals. So I think to your point, and Sheriff Mack brought it up last week about Khrushchev when he was still the premier, secretary, whatever his official title was of the Soviet Union, making a statement that is we are witnessing, and largely the concern is the majority of folks don't recognize it. They don't recognize it as a threat. They don't recognize it as something that was promised 60 years ago. It's coming to pass. And we're sitting here passively watching our country make a sea change in the way we are governed. And it seems like nobody cares. We're sitting on our hands watching football games and basketball games, and the world is changing around us. And ultimately, Bree, your generation and those coming behind are going to be left with what our complacency has dumped on you, and it's terribly unacceptable. I was with a friend who come over to meet me here today on the coast, from who's been down here in Florida for a long time, who's a state citizen such as myself, and he said, you said it a long time ago, and I think we are there. It cannot be fixed through traditional means. This thing has to be taken to ground level, completely disassembled, no two stones left standing on top of each other, because there is no path back using the methods that were put in place.
Yeah. That's exactly it. And what you said about those in power using both of these concepts as a mean to an end, I mean, what a beautiful thing for them, right? Because what I see is that each time one of these parties gets back in power, which it always does, the pendulum always swings, right? We go all the way to the right, right? That's where we are now. Oh, the big MAGA movement. We got all these Republican people in there, all these conservative minded folks in there. Well, look how that's going, right? But the pendulum always is going to swing back, just as it did to get us to this point. And each time it swings, it goes further into one of these categories, further into communism, further into corporatocracy, both of which can destroy us. So the people behind the scenes, they don't care. They say, let the pendulum swing. Because eventually, it doesn't matter what side finally takes us down, both will be capable of it.
Correct. They're actually, when we're swinging this way, they're actually helping the swing. When it swings back the other, they're helping it swing that way. Your point exactly. They don't care which side topples us. They really don't. Mm-hmm. That means zero to them. We get all caught up in Republican, Democrat, red, blue, progressive, conservative. No. They're using both of our human instincts to stick up for one side or the other to promote what they are trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. And that is total destruction of personal freedom. And that's what this country was built on. Personal liberty. They don't want any of us to have personal liberty. They don't care which side takes us out of that model.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So let's get into the other side of it just to kind of look at that example. And I liked what you called it better because I think people can identify with what that means a little better. Corporate cronyism. That's what it is. It's really money transfer. It's wealth transfer between government officials and big corporations. And that's why I believe that this is where we're at when we look at the Republican Party right now. I actually think that the parties have gone through different mechanisms. Maybe not always communism and corporate cronyism, but sometimes they switch these ideas as they get back in power and as that pendulum swings to what the current mood of the people is. What will cause the most distress if the other party is now leaning this way? And that's probably a big reason of why we see these parties changing ideologies all the time, but people still staying with the party because they've already agreed, I'm Democrat. Don't care. I don't care if they have changed their mind on every value they hold dear in the last 30 years. And same with the Republican. I'm this, I'm that, so I'm locked in. So yes. All that said, let's look at why right now I think this is what we're seeing from the Republican Party. I pulled up a couple of recent examples because this is where we're currently at on this sliding scale with Republicans in power. So one that was very recent, and I think we had talked about this quite a few episodes ago because this whole glyphosate situation had been being discussed for quite a long time. Glyphosate, otherwise known as Roundup. There was a case against Monsanto, Monsanto versus Darnell. This was at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, just within the last few days, ruled that the plaintiff's state law failure to warn claim was preempted by federal pesticide law. So the case could not proceed on that theory. Basically meaning that there's nothing that you or I can do if we get sick from this stuff, if we get cancer, if we get any number of illnesses, because they don't have to warn us. Legally, they don't have to tell us about what it can do to harm us. And if we get harmed, there's really nothing we can do to sue them. So this whole thing that was going on was basically the whole Maha movement was trying to get us back to a place where we could sue these big companies who are quite literally poisoning our food and water system at the ground level. And now we can't do that. We can't sue these companies like Monsanto. So the decision really matters here because a lot of people came forward to testify for this and say how they were personally harmed. And it didn't matter. So this is an example of where the government is supposed to be looking out for the people, for its constituents, and it didn't. It chose corporation over the people. Ultimately, as I said, this decision basically limits how people can sue over claims that Roundup caused harm, even though the company still faces broader public controversy, right? Obviously, everybody kind of knows the name Monsanto. I think people are becoming familiar with the term Roundup, but for us, it doesn't mean anything. everything that's happened to people over the last however many years because of this means nothing, and our government told us that. They put their stamp of approval on this. So that's just one example. I've got more, but anything you want to add to that one?
Yeah, I think it's a perfect example to show how the government controls, that being the legislative body and the courts, worked in favor of their corporate donors. Here is a company that is using a product that is clearly known, and we were all very hopeful that Bobby Kennedy was going to, and to a certain extent, he did bring some of these issues to the forefront. However, there was no resolution. We just got batted back into the corner, shut up peons. We're going to allow any company that is in support of the agenda to poison you, and you have no recourse. That is largely what was said. And there are many examples, and I'm sure you're going to go into some other ones, but this is how we, by being asleep, are being taken advantage of. It doesn't matter if it's a Republican or if it's Democrat. Government said to we the people, too bad, no recourse. Go on with your life. So that should be symbolic to everybody. I don't care what you may have wore behind your name, RD, red, blue, otherwise. None of them are working for our best interest. If they're going to continue to allow companies to expose us, our children, our food supply, water supply, as you indicated, to poison, and we can do nothing about it, how do you think that there is a Republican or a Democrat that is looking out for you if this is what your government has just said? And it's been all over the paper. It's been all over the news. It's out there. And we do nothing. That's why we got what we got. You get what you tolerate, folks, and we tolerate this.
Right, right. And it's such a shame because, to your point, that is one good thing of what Bobby Kennedy did down there, is he did make these things more known. A few years ago, most people never heard of these concepts. This idea that glyphosate or Roundup was poisoning you. So at least now it's known. But doesn't that make it worse? Now we know and we still don't care. We're just letting this decision happen and we're not absolutely raising hell in the streets. Like, this is the government spitting in our face. And again, one of many examples, but where they go, great, we heard what you had to say. We saw the protests. We saw the signs. We saw all of the noise online. We don't care. Like, that is absolutely the opposite of what a government is supposed to do. That's like your only job, is to listen to what we want and make it so.
I don't know if any of our listeners have spent any time listening to Colonel Douglas McGregor, and he pointed out the same thing in an interview that he's done. I don't know if it was with Andrew Napolitano or somebody else, but he's a great guy to listen to. He points out that this is happening in Europe and it's happening here. Government does not listen to us. What do we need to do? We need to get rid of government, both over in Europe and here. We need to get rid of the people that you thought you put in place to work on your behalf, who are working against your best interest. They are working 180 degrees against your wishes. They are working solely in interest, to your point about corporate cronyism. They are working to the benefit of the big corporations. That's who puts them in office. That's who greases their wallets. That's how these people go in there. And in a couple of short terms, they are multimillionaires. If you're making 175 or 185,000, whatever it is right now as a representative, how do you become a millionaire, multimillionaire in a couple years in office? This is what's happening, and it's happening because we're asleep at the wheel.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's look at some of these other examples. Obviously, data centers have been something we've talked about a lot the last few weeks, and this is one that I may have kind of mentioned vaguely without having the details on. And I think it's a good one to bring up because data centers are so heavily discussed right now, and for good reason. And it's another example of exactly what we're talking about. In Saline Township in Michigan, the residents and the local officials voted against a massive AI data center proposal. But the developer pushed forward anyway through legal action and more or less the threat of how costly of a fight this would be, and there's nothing you people can do anyway. I'm coming in here with all this money. Too bad, so sad for you. You're small, I'm big. I'm coming in and I'm building the data center. And that's happening. And this is, again, a perfect example of where, and to be fair, I shouldn't even say that the government is completely at fault because the local government didn't want this either. But nobody stopped it. Where is somebody else? Who do you go to then if the local government can't do it? Isn't that a good time to maybe then go towards the federal government, go a little bit higher and say, hey, we have an issue here. Where's the sheriff? Like, where is everyone that should be stopping this?
That's a great, that's 100% on. As our guest would have said last week, if you had a constitutional sheriff, there's one person who could have arrived at the gates to the property where this was going to take place and say it ain't happening here. Secondarily, he mentioned Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, which is the federal government has to, by constitutional mandate, provide for everybody a Republican form of government. You have a Republican form of government at the local level, and they said it ain't happened here, and your government was overrun by a corporation. Then the federal government is to mandatorily make sure that the Republican form of government gets its wishes. So none of these parties, local, state, or at the federal level, are looking out for you, me, we the people. They are looking out for the corporate interest. They are looking out for those who are trying to push the communist agenda. The last people that they listen to are the people who are still standing around clapping. Republican, Democrats standing around clapping. They are absolutely working in your own worst interest. They are doing nothing to protect you and your children. And until we decide to take it back, I love the saying a long time ago, I'm not promoting violence. Our forefathers would have been shooting a long time ago. This is an outrage. We are living under absolute despotism, and we are doing it because of our complacency, and we're sitting on our hands doing nothing.
Yeah. Exactly. So let's get into the last example I have of this one. And this one is more on that military industrial complex side of things, because obviously we can look at any of the corporations in any of these categories, big pharma, the war machine, all the tech stuff like we just discussed, all of these things. These are all the big corporations that are shaking hands, sharing money behind closed doors with our government officials, and ultimately making the decisions that we're not being able to make. This one is actually about the whole Russia-Ukraine war, which, has been frustrating for us from the beginning. Obviously, all these people who are, rah, pro-Ukraine, most of them do fall on the left side of the scale, I would say, pretty confidently. But what's kind of funny about this is that generally the people on the left aren't pro-corporation. They're not pro-military industrial complex. That's typically the Republican side of things. But if we actually look at where all the spending went, we've sent billions and billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine. But if we break it down, not that much of it actually went to Ukraine. Most of it went to the big corporations here that build all of the war toys. They went to our corporations, our military industrial complex corporations that ended up sending all sorts of different equipment over there, sure. So in a roundabout way, yes, we did give them aid. I'm not disputing that. Of course, the taxpayer spent billions and billions of dollars on it, but the taxpayer was giving that money to American corporations. That's what we were doing. That's, again, a wealth transfer. That's what all of this is. So again, another perfect example of where our government takes from us, takes from the little guy to give to the big corporation. Billions of dollars they took from us to give to their friends, their cronies.
Yeah. Perfect point. Both of those instances, the war in Ukraine, the war in Iran back, it seems to be gone kinetic again. $2 billion a day it is cost to keep the fleet and the troops and the sailors and all of those things over there. And for what? What is it for other than the point you just made? It's to take from us, we the laboring class, and stuff it in the pockets of the rich globalist, industrialist, military industrial complex, globalist bankers. And we are standing around cheering for it. We're cheering for it. When every intelligence agency in the country said, no, there's no imminent threat. All the people that were his advisors, who did he push for? He pushed for the corporate interest that got him elected. Mm-hmm. He pushed for the Israeli lobbyist group. who wants perpetual war in the Middle East and wants to expand the Israeli footprint in the Middle East. He went against campaign promises of ending Ukraine war on day one and continued funneling billions and billions of your hard-earned dollars. What you were out busting your ass for to provide your kids a better livelihood was stolen from you after he lied to us and said it wouldn't happen. We wouldn't be going in. And how are we still standing around cheering for it while they are stealing from us, taking away the opportunity for our kids to have a better life? Because they're not going to. They are not going to. And one of the other things that I'm listening to, a lot of the chatter related to these conflicts going on, and now the Strait of Hormuz is back, being in a conflict area, as these vital commodities slow back down to a trickle. The oil that's needed around the world to fuel the world, the fuel production, the nitrogen-based fertilizers that come out of there to help feed the world. This is going to cause exponential inflation, and it's coming fairly quickly. As these things start to have an impact on the global marketplace, they're going to happen very quickly. Inflation's going to go through the roof. And when people get hungry, when people are out on the streets and can't feed their family, something's going to happen. And I'm not too sure that these data centers aren't going to be used for something else. Almost every state has multiples of these things going on. What are they really for? What's going on inside there? It doesn't seem to me that all the computers needed to run all this need to have one in every county. Is it something else? Are they looking forward to something else? I think there are hard times coming. I think it's going to be before the end of the year. Quite possibly, if they don't calm all that nonsense down over there in the Strait of Hormuz and otherwise, it'll be before the midterm. Not as if the election makes any difference, but it's probably going to happen before then. When inflation rates spike astronomically, food becomes scarce over time because of the lack of fertilizers being put out to the countries that are producing food for the world. This could get quite bad, and I'm not too sure, going all the way back to earlier in the conversation tonight, that this isn't part of the plan.
Mm-hmm.
Do they really just want to collapse the global economy? Do they want global unrest? Do they want global hunger? Is this all part of the plan? And to my way of thinking, this isn't a mistake. These are not catastrophic mistakes that are being made. It looks like we got half the country cheering, half not. It looks like this is no. These are planned moves. These are orchestrated moves, and these are to achieve the goal of the Epstein class, those that want to rule the whole world, and they are not elites.
Mm-hmm.
They're scumbellies. We should have been stringing them up a long time ago instead of idolizing these.
Amen. Yeah. Yeah. Interestingly enough, there's a person that I've followed for a long time who's in this community, that we are working to spread truth and fight for freedom as best we can, who shared quite a while ago. It's been maybe about a month. He and his family lives in Texas. He and his family had a trip booked to Australia in, I want to say, November. And like a month, maybe 2 months ago, they got an email from the airline saying that due to the need to conserve gas at that time, the flight was canceled. So we're talking 6-7 months in advance. Right now, your flights aren't getting canceled. No, you can fly anywhere right now. But somehow these airlines know that by November, we're not going to be able to fly around the world. Isn't that a little weird that they know that?
Isn't that a head fake? Isn't that one of those things that they put out there for you to see? Like, look what's coming. Exactly right. You've mentioned at different times on previous podcasts about how they always telegraph their moves. These things are always telegraphed as if this is part of the whole dogma around this demonic class.
Mm-hmm.
That part of what they have to do prior to pulling these events is advertise it through you by presenting it to you one way or another. And I think the same thing. And I am very, very concerned about the possibility of in 12 months or maybe less, but certainly within 12 to 18 months, food scarcity issues, energy scarcity issues, which are going to compound food scarcity issues. And we're still running around worrying about basketball games and shit. And to me, there are events going on in the world around us that should be a significant reminder that we are living in very dangerous times, very fragile infrastructure here in this country. It's been overtaxed and overworked for a long time. And there are signs that this thing could come toppling down, which we talked about earlier tonight, is I think exactly what they want to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So before we stray too far down that conversation, I know we want to wrap this up soon. I just want to kind of go back to that idea of the corporate cronyism. We gave some examples. From my perspective, that's what we see. That's what we have in office right now, a corporatocracy. What would this look like at its most extreme? Well, corporations shaping laws. Okay, that's just what we have here. That was 3 examples. There's a lot. It would look like taxpayers and constituents being put secondary to profit. Okay, same thing. We just made the points. It would look like the privatization of essential systems. Okay, let's look at all of the safety infrastructure going up. Flock cameras. It's privately owned. It's privately run. It's being utilized by the government, but it's not owned by the government. It's not the government's infrastructure. Let's look at all the environmental infrastructure, to save the planet. All the things that we talked about with Jared and Mike. All these solar panels going up, all of this pipeline nonsense. These are privately owned multi-billion-dollar corporations. This is not the government doing these things. Please don't be confused. The government is utilizing the tools of privately owned corporations and spending big with our money to put that infrastructure in. So these things that it would look like at its most extreme are what we have. What would that mean? What's the key danger, the key takeaway if it were on this side of the pendulum when we collapse? Well, that's the republic bending to wealth and influence. That's our vote meaning nothing. And again, I would say that's where we're at.
The only thing I wanted to throw in there, I don't know if any of our listeners are inclined at all to listen to J.P. Sears, but one of the folks we talked about not too many sessions ago was Peter Thiel and Palantir. If you go on J.P. Sears, he has an excellent piece about Peter Thiel and Palantir, and it goes into both Peter Thiel behind the scene life, and it goes into the dangers of Palantir. If you have a chance, you ought to check it out. It's not that long, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, but it uncovers stuff in the way that the J.P. Sears delivers it. It's quite comical if it wasn't so serious a matter. But there's a great resource that everybody can go to if you want to hear what's really going on. And when you were talking about the corporate influence controlling law and putting things in place that are only there to control us, the Peter Thiel and Palantir came to mind right off the bat.
100%. Yeah. I mean, we did a whole episode on it, but I will go ahead and find that link and put it in the show notes too, so people can find it easily. The last thing when we're looking at these two sides, choosing communism, choosing corporatocracy, which is what we're doing when we're deciding to vote one party or the other. The only other option is choosing something else. Well, what is something else? It's the removal of the system. It's the system being so underutilized that it goes away. That means we step out of it. That doesn't mean we wait for the system to fall apart. It means we remove ourselves from the system. Amen. Just a few days ago, Trump posted on his True Social account, "The communists are finally making their move. I've been waiting and preparing for this for a long time. It's easy to be a communist. All you have to do is say, I'll give you everything, but that means you're taking it away from others that have earned it. Over thousands of years, that ideology has not worked once. The game is on. Enjoy watching." That's what Trump posted. First of all, I really don't like the way this ends. The game is on. Enjoy watching. This is what our president says to the people of this country. The game against communism is on. For me, this post signals this exact thing that we said early on. All of this is controlled by something much bigger. And the people who are most powerful, the United States president, says, hey, look over there. They're the bad guys. Well, he too is part of this other problem. He's pointing at communism while being very much involved in cranking up all of the corporatocracy that's going on in this country. So this is the exact perfect example of how each of these two parties have been so engulfed by these most extreme counterparts. Well, how have they been engulfed? Because somebody made sure that it happened. all of a sudden, like I said, we keep pushing further over here, further to the left, further to the right, further into communist ideologies, further into corporate cronyism, because somebody wants all of this to come crashing down. And that means we're going to have to be at the most extreme to do it. So each party calls out the other for what they are. And while it's true, it does not mean that they're not taking part in their own evil. It's the pot calling the kettle black. And if we fail to see the flaws that are in each party, we risk trusting one party. And what I'm here to tell you is we cannot trust either. That's the point of this episode. That's what I'm really trying to get at here. That's what's been in my mind all week since we talked with Sheriff last week. Sure, I agree. The Democrats are leading us down a communist road. But if we do not look at the other side and the road we're heading on there, we're missing the entire point.
Yep. I think that, again, Bree, is such a good way of explaining it. Hey, look over here. Here's the bad guys. Look what they're doing. And by shifting your gaze to that new target, you've taken your gaze off of the guy who really is in control right now, or at least appears to be, sans the Israeli influence and all those things. But he's the guy, at least the figurehead, and he's the guy facilitating a huge transfer of wealth, i.e., as we just talked about, through the war, military industrial complex, international banking community, because he's got us all over here looking at the communist threat, which only makes it easier for his side of the equation to get more of a knife stuck in our back by the action that they're pulling. So great way of putting that. I think that summed it up really well.
Yeah. Thanks. Well, the last thing I can really say about all this is what you mentioned early on, actually, not even knowing where this conversation would head. You mentioned it in the very first moments of you talking, was that since we began this podcast, the things that we've talked about is trying our best to share with you the information that we have so you can discern and come up with what you see as truth for yourself. And we've worked to share with you ways to become more self-sufficient in different aspects of life, ways to take back your own health, ways to educate yourself, ways to educate your children at home. We've done as much as we can in the couple years that we've been on to try and push self-sufficiency. And this is why, because until we remove ourselves from the system stands. We can keep voting the right guy in, but as soon as he gets in, he's the wrong guy. And we're back to square one. We cannot keep relying on the same system that we know is broken. We know it's broken, but we vote for our guy anyway. Well, what good is that doing?
Yep.
If we do not remove ourselves from the system, who will? But by the time we all do, the system will no longer exist. If none of us are in it, the system is gone. There is no system, which means we have a chance to build a new system. And that's the goal. I think that's the goal, is we get to a place where we can build a new system. And it's going to take some collapsing. And that part will hurt. But it is necessary, and it's the only path out of this.
It is. There is no way to get from here to where we were supposed to be by the guarantees put in place by our founders to illuminate those God-given gifts of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, personal property, all of those things we're supposed to have, individual freedoms. There is no way to get those things back without there being a whole lot of assing. There just simply is not. It's either going to be through a slow, drawn-out economic collapse, or it's going to be a violent revolution of some sort. But there is no other way. Historically speaking, it has not happened. And that's our effort to educate people, to get them involved, to be more self-sufficient, to be more self-contained, raise your own food, teach your own children, those sort of things, is to be prepared for those bad days that are coming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and thinking about it in this way, thinking about it proactively, the collapse is coming. We have the choice to ensure it's a peaceful one by getting out of the system before it collapses itself. But it will not be peaceful if enough people don't see it in time. And I think that's a really important takeaway tonight when we think about this conversation, when we think about the sides and how at odds they are. We must remove ourselves from the system and collapse it willingly. That's what we have to do. That's our job. And it's our constitutional responsibility. Please do not forget that.
Right. don't participate in something that's broken. You're only prolonging it. Yeah, great point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's all I've got.
Well, that was good. I think we've already burned through an hour and then some. So hopefully that first piece where my internet dropped off will not affect the overall value of the show. I think it was a great topic. I hope there's people out there listening. We mentioned a couple of places where you can go and find these other voices who are proclaiming loudly on bigger platforms some of the same things that we've been saying, and go and listen to some of this stuff. It is only for your best interest and the interest of your children and loved ones.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know it's overwhelming. We've said that too, but you don't have to take it on all at once. Develop one skill. One. That's already more than most.
Yeah, like our guest a couple of weeks ago said, start out with something small. Make your own laundry detergent. Here's one of the worst things going as far as exposing yourself to what do they call them? Forever chemicals and all the rest of this stuff that we're being exposed to. Make your own soap. Take little steps. Take little pieces back, and you'll be further insulated from the thing that's coming apart.
Yeah. Yep. Perfect. All right. Well, if you want to close us out, I'm ready.
Okay, I have a Bible verse tonight. It says, anyone who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with their own hands, that they may have something to share with those in need. That comes from Ephesians 4:28. So if we became self-sufficient, self-reliant, we wouldn't need government to be the solution, the do-all for all things, which is really the way it was intended to be. So there's the Bible verse for tonight.
Yeah, that fit right in. I mean, it's funny. Some days the Bible verse fits in so well, and you pick them so far in advance before even knowing the topic for tonight. So, I mean, there's something to that, I think, and hopefully everybody takes that piece of Ephesians with them, because that's perfect.
All right. Well, as always, Bree, great show tonight. Good seeing you. Best to everybody out there over the upcoming 4th of July celebration. Remember what it's really about. It's about the blood that was spilled, providing for us the inheritance that we're letting slip away.
Yeah. I kind of forgot that we will not have an episode before the 4th. Our next episode will actually be after the 4th. So happy 4th of July, everybody. You know, the last thing that I'll say with all of this conversation, like many that we have are kind of heavy and kind of depressing. You can hate your government and love this country, and you should still be proud to be here and to be a part of it, because we're, I think, coming up on one of the biggest times in history since 250 years ago. So take some pride in that, and take some pride in maybe being part of what is us taking this country back again.
Amen.
Alrighty, everybody. Happy 4th of July, and stay vigilant.
Stay vigilant.
Thank you so much for listening. We really do appreciate the support and truly love getting to share this message with anyone who wants or needs it. The best way for you to support the show is to subscribe, add a rating, and share with everyone you know. You can find us on Instagram, X, and at thefourthbox.com. We'll see you next Thursday at 6 p.m. Stay vigilant.